For today's gospel, we heard Luke's introduction to John the Baptist. Now, Luke spends about half of this reading just establishing time and place. He specifies where John is, and he names the various leaders of the day and how long they've been in power, because that's how you told the year back then. You know, we didn't have BC AD back then. You would say it was during the 6th reign of this person in Rome or Babylon or Jerusalem or whatever. So once Luke gets those details squared away, then he gets into his more spiritual message that the Spirit of the Lord came to John as it was foretold in the book of the prophet Isaiah. And then the final part of the reading is the relevant portion of the book of Isaiah. Make straight the paths of the Lord, one cried out in the wilderness. Every valley shall be filled in, every mountain be made low, the winding, crooked ways will be somehow made straight, and rough ways will be made smooth, and all flesh will see salvation. Now, Isaiah, he was a pretty clever dude. He actually gave us a curveball in this quote, but I doubt anyone catches it the first time they read this gospel. And the curveball is that last line about all flesh seeing salvation. So let me back up just a little bit first. The first part of his quote is all about God changing the very contours of the earth. All right? Mountains and valleys he makes into level ground. Crooked ways are made straight. Difficult ways made easy. God is the master of heaven and earth. The very land is his to command. No shocker there. We've heard that sort of thing before. That's kind of like the warm-up, really. The shocker is that last line. All flesh will see the salvation of God. And here's why it's the shocker. People, believers, throughout all of history of all different faiths, have constantly been debating that exact concept. Is our flesh good, or is it in fact the very cause of our sinfulness? And there are people throughout all of history that say, yeah, our flesh is evil automatically. And it comes from all different angles. Some of the early religions and the Greek philosophies, they had big issues with flesh. And they essentially, in the end, taught that perfection for us is attainable in the eternal sense of the word, but it will not involve our mortal bodies. These philosophies and religions, such as the Gnostics, they would essentially teach that salvation was something for your soul, and the rest of you, it doesn't really apply. For the Jews, they had some of that sort of teaching, but they also had prophets like Isaiah that would proclaim that, yes, our flesh does enjoy the salvation of God. And unfortunately for us Christians, it's so much more complicated, because for us, we've inherited all of that Greek philosophy, and we've inherited all the Jewish teachings, and to stack on top of that, we have the writings of Paul. And Paul makes things so much more difficult. In some of his writings, Paul says very clearly that flesh is the exact opposite of spirit. That our flesh and our spirit are constantly at odds with one another, and that we should not trust our flesh. If your flesh tells you to do something, do the opposite. But other parts of his writings talk of flesh as something more or less neutral, if something to keep your eye on. I guess we might be able to call that tolerated neutrality. Okay, that's not an official term, I made that up, but it's the best way I can describe that part of Paul. So we're not getting into Paul now. We do not have time for that. But whatever your answer is to the question, is our flesh good or bad? Luke, John the Baptist, and Isaiah have indeed given us their response. All flesh will see salvation. It's a message of hope for all things, even our meat. And I like that message because it echoes God's love for all things. Because remember, God doesn't just love a part of you. He doesn't love our souls and hate our bodies like a kid that only eats the inside of the Oreo cookie. It's not like that at all. All things belong to God. All things claim salvation through God. And nothing that is even remotely good will be sealed against that divine love. So today, let us rejoice in the mightiness of the Lord, who somehow makes crooked ways straight. And in the same way, he makes our crooked bodies straight, as an element of our salvation alongside our minds and our spirits.